I'm going to make a pre-introduction, if you will, because I'm going to turn the meeting, as always, over to our esteemed Environment Committee Chairman and Energy Subcommittee Chairman, who is also now the Executive Board Chairman for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. So Mayor Kevin Burns was elected Executive Board Chairman yesterday, and so now is going to keep both jobs. I'm really proud that he's going to stay on. It's a bit of plus being mayor, and we're so lucky to have him. He's been with the Environment Committee for 5 years and is now going to be leading the organization. You got some applause there, Kevin. So with that, pre-intro. With that pre-intro, I turn it over to you to begin the meeting.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And again, happy Tuesday to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. We are beyond delighted to be able to boast that Argonne National Laboratory, which all of you are familiar with, is a huge partner of ours throughout this region and, of course, throughout the United States. There are only 17 national labs in the U.S., and Illinois has 2 of them. Of course, our friends from Argonne, and out west here in Batavia, the folks at Fermilab. Argonne was born out of the University of Chicago's work on the Manhattan Project to create the world's first self-sustaining nuclear reaction. Today, the laboratory's initial charge to find peacetime uses for atomic energy has broadly expanded. Argonne researchers seek to find new discoveries in energy, climate, and health that will advance American prosperity and security. The Mayor's Caucus has enjoyed a friendship with Argonne for many, many years. Our Environment Committee has toured Argonne multiple times. Argonne has hosted all 3 of our Soul Smart ceremonies celebrating solar policy achievement throughout Northeastern Illinois. And Argonne's solar labs, of course, are a huge attraction. And Argonne scientists Seth Darling and Doug Sisterson helped the caucus with our first regional forum on climate way back in 2017. Argonne scientists Dr. Katamarthi contributed to our climate action plan for the Chicago region, beginning in 2019. And over the years, we have collaborated with Argonne on Greenest Region core goals related to smart cities, technologies, water, and clean fuels. CROCUS is our most extensive collaboration to date. So please join me and the entire caucus welcoming Dr. Christina Negri, Director of Environmental Science Division at Argonne and the Director of the CROCUS project, and also joining Dr. Negri is Suzanne Beaudry, CROCUS Project Manager, and Georgia Porter, Community Engagement Strategist. Dr. Negri, the floor is yours. Again, thank you to you and your entire team for joining us. We look forward to your presentation, and as we discussed in advance, you are welcome, or you are interested in taking questions as you present. So we will make certain we monitor the chat and everything else. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Burns. I'm super delighted to be here today to talk to you about CROCUS, and I really I'm appreciative of the long history of collaboration with NMC that Argonne has had over the years, and I trust that this will be another fantastic opportunity and a fantastic way for us to collaborate. I will shortly share my slides. Maybe Suzanne, if you want to say a couple, and Georgia, if you want to say a couple of words about yourself as I share my slides, that would be great, and we can get going.
Of course. Thanks, Christina. I'm Suzanne Beaudry. Like Mayor Burns said, I am the CROCUS project manager. I work out of Argonne as a project manager in our project management organization. And CROCUS is one of the projects that I'm assigned to. Georgia, if you want to go. Or I think Georgia was dealing with some issues with mute. I don't know if you're able to unmute. No. Okay.
I think she's having some difficulty, so.
Anyways, she put her introduction in the chat, so
yes.
So we can see that. So thank you all. Sorry, my computer is kind of jumpy, but what I would like to do today is provide an overview of CROCUS, and I started to put in my presentation thinking teaser points to how we can collaborate together, examples of things. But of course, we are not limited to those things. The purpose of this meeting is to really get everybody on board and and help us define further how we know the best ways to collaborate. I should also add that you'll see a lot of work we have been doing over this year on the city of Chicago, in the land of the city of Chicago, but this project is broader than the city. And so keep in mind when you see that work, it is our intent to expand to the whole MMC area. And so that's exactly the point of this meeting. So take it as an example of what we can do, and look forward. I look forward to expanding those mapping, those activities to the whole area for MMC. With that, I think we can get started. And you have seen we introduced you to the various members of the Argonne team here, and just basically reiterate why we're here, to find ways to collaborate and work towards mutual benefits. There's a lot we want to do, and it works well when the collaboration is factual, purposeful, and targeted to mutual interests. CROCUS stands for Community Research on Climate and Urban Science. And so the purpose of community is really, in the sense, is really to get to the community of MMC in this particular meeting. I'll give you a quick introduction to CROCUS, and then have a conversation of why we are here, and discussion of mutual benefits of the collaboration, and then hopefully a recap of action items for the next meetings, where we put a lot more detail into our collaboration. I put in indicative timings for these, but it doesn't have to be. I'm happy to take questions as they come. Please put them in the chat. We'll monitor the chat to make sure. But I cannot see the chat, so somebody else needs to point me to that, because in presenter mode it's really hard to see. So what is CROCUS? Who makes CROCUS, and why are we actually thinking about CROCUS? This project is funded by the federal agency, the United States Department of Energy, who is Argonne's landowner, pretty much, and manager and landlord. The science goals for this new program is to understand the natural and human drivers and the effects of environmental change in an urban area. This is a fundamental science project. It's funded by an organization that funds research into how clouds are made. So very fundamental, but it's moving further into the realization that climate change wouldn't be climate change if it weren't humans involved in this, and so whether we talk about adaptation or mitigation of climate change, humans have to be part of the research, because their actions are directly related to climate change, and this research is really meant so to be one that provides societal benefits. It should really help inform sustainable, resilient, and equitable solutions for community, with special attention to underserved communities in there. We started last year, the Department of Energy funded 4 of these urban integrated field laboratories. One is in Austin, one is in Baltimore, one is in Chicago, and another one is in Southwest Corridor. And you see there the folks who have been funded. Ours is the only one that's funded by operated by a national lab directly. The community research on climate urban science is really made of 4 major communities, but of course it involves the whole area. You're the first ones, the Regional Resilience and Sustainability. Edith is working with our groups and try to steer the research into topics that are of interest. There's also 3 more grassroots organizations that are operating in the Chicago city region. One is in Woodlawn, the community of Woodlawn. Another one is Chatham, and the other one is in Humboldt Park. And they all face issues with climate change, whether it's flooding, which is a great concern of Chatham, or heat, or air quality, as well as creating a future that's sustainable for their community in the years to come, as we move into a green and decarbonized society. CROCUS is a large partnership. You see there all the community members, all the CROCUS members in there. There are 17 organizations, in academic institutions and community organizations in there. We have major research institutions like Northwestern, University of Chicago, and others. We also have many local minority serving institutions, like the City Colleges of Chicago, like Chicago State University, like North Carolina A&T University, which is a historically Black college university, and Northeastern Illinois University. We also have the 4 community members that I mentioned in the slide before. So it's a huge organization, and it's our job and Suzanne's job to keep everybody in line and working collaboratively to achieve our common goals. What we are doing different in this, again, to achieve that idea of societal benefits, is really that while scientists typically do the things in the blue boxes there, we have a science question, we go at it, and we observe and model until we address it. In this particular case, our science questions are informed by communities, and that's the work we have been doing as we were even writing the proposal with Edith and others, to come up with questions that really would be fitted and inclusive and cognizant of what people want in their area. And you're no stranger to this. Your community, the Climate Action Plan has had a tremendous amount of community input. We will be happy to learn from you how you did that. But basically, when we think of a just energy transition, resiliency, adaptation, energy and environmental justice, these are all the concerns that came out of conversation with our community partners, and basically allowed us to select questions that are pertinent, they are inclusive, and they are relevant to the community that we are eventually going to help and serve. Ultimately, what we would like to do at the end of the story in the 5 years of the project is create scientifically advanced tools for decision making and to build stakeholder capacity. And I'll say a little more about that. So while focused on the Chicago region, we realized that climate change is a complex issue and that involves the whole world. We presented some of our work at the United Nations in the Habitat Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, where we were reminded that there's about 3.3 billion people in the world that face climate change. And each one has very, very specific concerns that are maybe different from the neighbor. So the idea is to create a set of tools and a set of approaches that will then be easily replicated other places with the right adaptation, of course, to the different situation. So when we think about Chicago, and again, here is the map of Chicago, but we are really thinking broader than Chicago, is really that that it is very, very diverse and very heterogeneous to that matter. But just to give you an idea of what we have been thinking and in working with the communities, all the concerns out there in the multicolored box are the ones that came up of our discussions. Flooding and heat, so there's very, very physical ones, but there's also other that have more socioeconomic concern, the concern of communities that once they turn their community in a green, thriving community, they'll be gentrified because people will want to get in there and moved to some other area that it's not as developed yet. So what you see here, what we are trying to address in the future is really understanding concerns like heat. You can see the images there, roof temperatures and AC consumption don't go hand in hand in this particular area, and so that leaves people. There were people that are much more vulnerable than others because they don't have the means to protect themselves from heat. So what we want to do is really go into more detail about what that really indeed is and put a quantitative number on it, and really basically understand exactly in place scenarios and say, if we did this, what would be the outcomes directly to this big concern. Okay, and so now I would like to take a little bit of time to actually let people either talk, take the microphone, or write in the chat what concerns have you most worried about climate change? What concerns you the most about climate change?
And feel free to chime in, folks. Cheryl and Edith and I will be monitoring the chat, but if you want to jump in, please do so. We want this to be a organic and passionate conversation. I know
Yes,
that most of you
indeed.
are very eager to chime in anyway, so go for it. Heat extremes is one, no
Yes,
question about it.
absolutely.
You know, if I may, Dr. Negri, on a global scale, my
Mhm.
challenge is always trying to drill down to what's actually practical in terms of what we can do, because we
Yes,
get so wrapped up in the perspective of, oh my gosh, we tend to paralyze ourselves in terms of action.
yes. And interesting. I've found a way to look at the chat, but
Oh, good.
water insecurity
Weather,
with growing population, extreme weather events, local flooding. Yes,
flooding
what
is
we
always,
can do. Yeah, what can we do? That's a good question. But actually, one of the purposes of CROCUS is actually the one of thinking things and just putting them under our lens and figuring out what would be the likely outcome if you do thing X or thing Y, and also highlight some of the trade-offs, because my sense is that there's going to be many trade-offs to make, and so what are those trade-offs is going to be an important thing.
right. We got some great comments in the chat.
Yes, and we will be glad to collect them and to share them with you once we have the meeting done and we have saved the chat. So this is all great. Increased mortality for the elderly goes same with the heat extremes, of course. Not addressing the issue too soon. Yes, absolutely. And my chat goes too fast. Water allocation, indeed, water allocation is big. I think there's a big concern about water, of course. Wonderful. Keep putting them in, and I'll keep going. But this is a fantastic way to get the conversation going. So, what is CROCUS going to do? It's going to do a couple of things, but basically, the idea behind CROCUS is to, one, observe, model, create a baseline of what's happening now as far as heat, flooding, air quality, a number of different things, and then define future scenarios, and I'll speak more to that. What could we do? What are the tools we have available for ourselves to address some of the critical situation? And then analyze those scenarios and really, as I said, look at trade-offs, look at what would be gained, and try to be very quantitative about us, right? And I'll have examples for you. But as you see, we have an excellent test bed here. And what we want to do is two things. One is to improve the representation of urban cities in climate models. Right now, urban areas are just one pixel, if you will, in a large climate model. So we want to really get down to the granularity of that and really understand, for example, like a city of Chicago, how does it impact the climate around it in its region, right? How can we represent that? And the other piece is the other way around, is understanding how climate has an effect on urban communities right down at the street scale where people live, right? And the differences between one community and the next, one neighborhood and the next, because we have no data on that. And so again, the cities are represented in climate models like a one big splotch. We want to get into that big splotch and the big pixel to break it down and really understand what's going on at the foundation of this. So we have two tools with that. We have modeling, computer models that are going to help us tremendously to understand and predict and find out what's going on. We also have a number of observations that we're going to do. If you think that the current network of observation stations is very limited, it's going to be really hard to get into that granular scale if we don't augment the observation points in the city. And when we talk about observation, we are talking about understanding heat, temperatures, relative humidity, precipitation, and air quality, and a lot of other parameters that make us understand the whole column of air, if you will, and this soil itself, and where the plants grow, and so on. So we have several different opportunities here. We have existing data set. What you see in one of these slides is really data, for example, that come from satellites, or data that come from aircraft. So many aircraft are equipped with sensors, and they fly, as they fly in and out of O'Hare and Midway, they can provide a ton of data. So we're going to do that. We're going to do a lot of other things. We're going to place some edge computing micronets that are mini weather stations in particular locations. We're going to come in with big rigs with trucks that have very sensitive and expensive instrumentation to do field campaign. And we are thinking of like community science, right? Thinking about providing simple weather stations and rain gauges to communities, to schools, to churches, and places like that, so we can have that granularity of observations that we really need. We have, as you can see there, we have a number of pre-existing places that we have worked with, across the whole team at CROCUS. We would really love to extend that to the MMC area and all the communities you're interested in.
Dr. Negri, before you continue, there's a question here that I think is relevant
Yes.
as you continue, and that is,
Yes.
I'm going to
Ask him to ask that.
Stone's question first and foremost. Can you explain how gathering more data will help us to take action? And then perhaps a related question is, how do we address the results of climate change, increased flooding, et cetera, with the work you're doing?
It will come. I have I have some slides that will specifically talk about those. So bear with me for a second, but it'll become more clear as we go. So again, observations at different scales will generate relevant data at the right scale. That's a little more in detail. That tiny picture in there, you will see our sensors here and the field campaigns that we're going to do throughout these 5 years of work. We have 4 observational components: the micronet, as I mentioned, field campaigns, public data, and community science. Those are the 4 pillars of our measurement strategy. And then we want to go and look at what solutions we are thinking about. And these are the ones we have thought so far, but that doesn't exclude additional ones if MMC has other ideas in there. The data that we're going to generate and model are going to be probably important to address, will probably enable us to do other things. If we need to gather more data, it would be nice to know so that we can do that. So there's, from the various communities that we have polled, a nature-based solution is a big thing. Green areas, improve green spaces in the city, both for temperature mitigation as well as flooding mitigation. But we also started working a little bit of understanding cool rooftops, photovoltaics, and other solutions, and obviously electric systems and decarbonization of transport is another big one. So we are in year 1 of 5. We'll get to these as we get deeper into our science.
Can I just interrupt with a question? You said you wanted questions as you go. So you said you're in year 1 of 5. From what I've been reading, we have 5 years to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, according to the science. So you're looking at studying these things and gathering more data over the next 5 years, during which time we should be dramatically reducing our emissions. And you had a lot of pictures of trucks on a previous slide that didn't look to me like they were electric trucks. So I'm just a little unclear as to why you feel it's necessary to do more studying and gather more data rather than taking action at this point.
So taking action is obviously very important, and we know, generally speaking, what could work in general terms. But as we all have said, action is very local. I would say that I agree it's very urgent to take action. However, resources are always limited. And so the funding would be a question for the Department of Energy, right? We know, generally speaking, what is good, but there's a lot of things that we may want to refine further, particularly for urban areas. And I agree, this should have happened. This program should have happened 15 years ago, but that's the way it goes. And yes, I totally agree with you. We have a couple of trucks. They're owned by some of our partners. That's going to be a minimal amount of work. They are not electrified because of the facility that they have. One comes from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The other one comes from University of Michigan in Wisconsin. Wisconsin in Madison. So yes, they are. We'll make sure that we'll ask them if they have a non-fossil fuel truck. However, the technology there is probably slow to catch up, and funds are what they are. But here it is really why we think it is really important to have this project. As I mentioned, the global to regional to local, they are going to be important in this. But in this case, you have all understood, heard about the concerns about science not being fair and equitable because we don't have data from the most vulnerable of the communities. And particularly when you get to AI, which is going to help some of our work, really, the biases that science can put in just because of what we sample and what we study. And that's why exactly a project like CROCUS is going to be different, and why we need to study more, because we want to go hyper local and really understand what things can we do at the local scale to they're going to be, frankly, put the basis for really fair, equitable, inclusive science. Again, this is a science project. I think that the fundamental science has to go hand in hand with some of the unmistakably important changes that we have to adopt to improve the outlook on climate change. That's why we are doing this, and that's why we're working with communities, because in being hyper-local, of course, we have to really be totally cognizant and in sync with communities on their needs and desires for the future. And I won't read all this. I just wanted to say that the idea of co-design and quantifying benefits of equitable climate solution is central to our work. And what we want to do is gather and understand what communities prioritize, develop this knowledge into something that science can address, and convert into a rigorous process that includes the questions, an ambiguous question, and so on. With that, we have expectation that our science not be extractive, but really provide useful information back to the communities. We expect to be easy to understand for a non-scientific audience. We expect to have respectful and ongoing and in good faith interactions to be the mantra for our work. And really, we hope the community help us to participating, help us really to better understand the problem at hand and be a partner in finding ways to answer our science questions. We have been connecting with communities with information exchange, engagement planning, community science. We have been doing a lot of this. We have done it mostly with our other community members in the city. Now, this meeting is exactly the one that we're hoping to have as a starter for the conversation with MMC. In addition to what we have been discussing with Edith along this last year, a couple of years actually. So what I'd like to do, again, this is a general question. We are getting our foot in the door. We haven't done a lot of direct community engagement because our human subjects research protocol is not approved yet. We have to work on that. But in the meantime, if you have an opportunity to provide a suggestion of what worked and what didn't work, as you were, I'm sorry, the CAC is not CAC, but CAS, the Climate Action Plan. If you have suggestions, we will be happy to hear from them. And I don't know that we need to do it. If it was to start putting them into the chat, I will be happy to actually have perhaps a more dedicated meeting to discuss these issues, because they're really critical and really are going to set the tone for how we're going to engage in community and learning a lot from all you have done as far as polling your communities to develop the climate action plan.
If Dr. Negri, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Reinhold, who has a quick question. Then we've got some other questions in the chat. I'm going to recruit Edith to help me as well on that, since.
Mayor Reinbold?
Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Always forget to unmute. Thank
Never
you,
have
Mr.
I
Chair.
heard you be so eloquent when you're on mute. So
It is, yes. Nobody's a lip reader. So I appreciate the opportunity. Doctor, quick question. Earlier, there was mention of what I'm going to call a data collection program where different locations could collect, I think it was climate data. Is there going to be an announcement of this opportunity? The reason I ask that is if we have a one-pager that we can send out to our schools, I think our schools would be interested in doing something like that. So just wanted to make that suggestion when you're ready to
Yes.
launch that. We would be able to push that out to our schools and other organizations within our areas.
We'll be glad to do that. We started piloting this. What we have done actually is taken and bought off some inexpensive rain gauges and inexpensive weather stations out of Amazon, cheap ones. What we have been doing with students last summer is test them against the nice and expensive instruments that we have. Right, and so we've been testing them, just making sure that we know how they perform, if they perform just as well, and what kind of data are good and what data are not so good. And so we'll be able shortly to actually provide some guidance to schools, and definitely we'll have an announcement, and we'll be able to buy a number of these. I cannot tell you exactly how many, and just have schools buy them. We already have a school who was super interested. They came and visited us. What we can do is actually bring students to our test center, test bed for all these things, give them a tutorial, work with them so they can either get ours or buy their own and work with them. We share the data, and we are there to help them troubleshoot and things like that. So that's coming soon. So be happy to provide you with that information.
Great, thank you. Look forward to that.
Thank you.
Chair.
I heard someone chime in. Is it?
Someone's chiming in, but I can't hear.
Let's see.
And my apologies, somebody decided to blow leaves right now, timely. And so maybe I hope it doesn't bother you too much.
Did you yell out the window saying "Leave the leaves" and see what
Yeah.
happens?
Yeah.
Lord. Edith and Cheryl, is there anybody else on the chat that building
Yes.
digitalization, etc.?
I will call attention. So I'm going to set aside some of the political requests here because I think that we've got to respect what Argonne can do and what they bring to the table here. So we've got lots and lots of concerns about inaction and attitudes. But if I can direct the questioning, so we've got a volunteer of assistance from Naperville. How Naperville could partner with Argonne. And then there's other questions which Dr. Negri, I think you're going to get to about how the CROCUS work will align with the climate action plan that was done for the region.
Definitely. I have a couple of slides on that. I should say that my ideas are just my ideas, and I really look forward to continued conversation about that because you are the owners of the Climate Action Plan, and you know more intimately than I do some of the opportunities and details. But I'll definitely point to some that I think stood up to me as I was reading it. So.
And I'm going to help you out a little bit here because the question you have on the screen, I think is something that our members can help answer.
Yes.
And so the suggestions would be to help CROCUS with community engagement. To those of you that were involved, and most of you were in preparing the climate action plan for the region, I wonder if somebody wants to volunteer and talk about how information is communicated and leadership for these kinds of conversations in the communities that you serve. And Mayor Burns, I don't know if we want to call on some of our folks here. I'd like to hear more about village boards, city councils, mayors, citizen commissions, staff. And I think that might be what would help Christina and her team right now understand how this partner, how the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus as a partner is different than the grassroots community organizations that are represented in Chicago. So let's go ahead and see if we have a mayor or staff person who wants to raise a hand and just sort of explain that.
My friend Ben from Naperville, who's done some great work, I know, through their Nest collaborative.
Sure. We also have trustee Israel,
Yes,
Councilwoman Stone, who could
Yep,
talk just
Councilwoman
about how
Stone,
it was working. Then I probably don't want to leave out Mayor Reinbold, who also works with the Illinois Municipal League. So I'm going to call on all of you to get started with explaining again how information is shared, and then we'll keep going through the guest list to see if others can explain that, because we have a lot of citizen commissioners on the call right now.
which is great.
And it may be that people need a little bit of time, so I'd be happy to continue on, and we can continue that conversation at the end of the presentation. Maybe people get a fuller picture, and we can set. But I'd be even as delighted to actually have a separate meeting where we just talk about community engagement as we formulate our plans. It will be really extremely helpful, not to repeat, things, but to really learn from your experience. All right, I'll continue for the moment. If there's people willing to answer, it'll be great. So I want to talk to you a little bit of progress to date, what we have been doing in understanding the heterogeneity in the area, and looking at what we mean by hyperlocal modeling and observations, just to give you an idea. Again, what we have been doing is collecting existing data, and this is for the city. Again, think about how we can do it for outside of the city. The city perhaps has a number of data sets that we can leverage. It'd be important to know what else is happening in the MMC area of interest. For example, we have been able to understand the spatial distribution, for example, of air quality parameters like PM, particulate matter 2.5, temperature, relative humidity. This is, a specific period between 2021 and 2022. This was a Microsoft project, and our colleagues at Washington University in St. Louis were able to put this map in there, try to understand the heterogeneity. In other words, where are the hotspots? Are they along major expressways? Are they along industrial corridors? Where are they? This is really important because as we decide how to observe the city and model the city, we need to have at least an orientation about what the major differences there are. On the right, you also see that we've been thinking not just spatially, horizontally on the horizontal level, but also 3D. The key question is there how building height is going to impact some of the processes that create temperature, wind, and other environmental conditions. So we have been working a lot, and we look forward to expanding the scope of the study to the metropolitan majors area region. Similarly, we have been looking at mapping tree canopy and its health, trying to understand where our green resources are, how are they healthy or not, and eventually connect them to other indicators, and whether they're socioeconomic indicators or physical location and placement away from the lake, close to the lake, near what kind of buildings and things like that. So we have been working on this. Again, it's a matter of expanding the study so that we actually have better information across. The idea there is really understanding truly, are the communities with more trees better than those that don't, and what drives that difference, and trying to be quantitative. What does it mean, on a quantitative level? And so touch points with the climate action plan and MMC region, we know you guys have developed all this data, which is fantastic. And so getting a little deeper and saying, where can we augment this understanding to be even more granular and really point locations where there's less data and it would be more desirable to have more information and more data, or where can our models really zoom in on particular concerns to make to basically for us to understand the science, and for MMC and the communities there to pinpoint issues more in detail, because again, action funding is limited, and so having some kind of data to help make decision is really CROCUS is never going to be prescriptive. The point of CROCUS is provide information for somebody else to make those decisions eventually. So those are some touch points that I saw. It's really great to see this initial data, and there are orientation data for us to say, well, if we want to look at flooding, where should we look? If we want to look at increased heat and temperatures, where should we look in the broader Chicago region, so that we make our study realistic and inclusive. We have done a lot of streets. If you want to go hyper local, then we need to really understand what's happening at the street scale, right? And one thing that science has not been able to do is look into the what is called the urban canyon. In other words, all the data are basically related to 30-meter up, like 10 feet up. And so they really don't tell us a whole lot about what happens where people walk and live, which is 1.5 meters, 2 meters, 5-6 feet or so. So what we have been doing is actually thinking about that a lot. Even roof temperatures don't really tell us a whole lot about what happens on the street, right? They are not human size related. So we have done a lot of work in putting kind of the building blocks of how do we correctly represent in our models an urban system. So what you see there is like a movie that shows the movement of heat above buildings, right? and so we are starting to really understand how that heat dissipates through the air column all the way up to where airplanes fly, and really try to understand the dimension of the heat bubble around the city and where the small island of increased heat are and what drives those islands, right? So what we have done then, thinking about solutions, we have also took the initiative of digitizing a tree, and understanding not only where it shades during the day and putting those data into a computer model so that we can actually then eventually play with it and say, if we put so many trees on the street, what is going to be the impact in temperature? We looked at the porosity of trees to wind. So you see that in that image is really how trees really react with wind, in a sense, to move air along and cool and bring cooler air and more moist air along the path of the wind. So we have been doing all these things, which are really, as we call it, building blocks to actually be more specific and more precise as we get a larger scale model. We also have been looking at temperature. This again is for the city. It'd be interesting to expand that. This is very visual, but it tells you during a day how temperatures change in the air, depending if you are at the center of a tall high-rise area, whether more residential, suburban, rural in there, and you can see how the heat dome goes up and down during the day, and how temperatures change and how their spatial location will influence its change. And so obviously these are important things. We are really putting a number on these temperatures, and so it's been more quantitative than previously done. And this is actually at a resolution of 80 meters, and so it's pretty granular at this time. We have been deploying instruments. You can see there one of our instrument nodes. This is on the rooftop of Northeastern Illinois University in the northwest side of the city. We have many more to install. These are telling us a lot of information about temperature, about precipitation, about a lot of other indices. By the way, we installed this right on time to actually track the air quality concerns during the Canadian wildfire events this summer, where we had all the smoke coming from Canada hitting the city, and the air was really, really bad. So we were able to track that. And so the idea is to put in there a denser network of these stations, so we can actually track what happens in the city and what drives those processes. We were also able to track firework pollution during 4th of July. So that's also interesting observation. So that's a question for you all. Are there specific locations that come to your mind that would need a closer look? Again, this is food for thought for this audience. We probably don't need answer right now, but just as a teaser and a getting way to get started with this, is if there are specific ways that we can collaborate on that and placing some of this instrumentation so that it can actually put a magnifying lens on particular concerns that your communities may have. This is a good time to have that discussion. I'm not saying now, but in the next month or so, as we plan our expanded observational strategy to have that information. So maybe people would like to to say a few things. In the meantime, I saw a question here. Canadian wildfire events, are they going to be excluded in the data set to protect from EPA enforcement? Yeah, so that's another thing. We are not a regulatory agency, so we are not doing regulatory observations. We are not monitoring things. We are just observing for science. And so it's a very different, we have no regulatory power at all. With that, there is collaborations with EPA, who also has a community science program in there, and they are very interested in understanding that, but not for regulatory purposes, for really understanding what happens in the region and how communities can face these challenges.
Edith, anything you spy on the chat that you'd like to address right away?
Dr. Negri, unless you're in a hurry, I think I'd like to take the question. You're
Yes.
you're deferring to later. So if people want to volunteer, there are some folks who have, expressed some interest in participating. So can we go ahead and take that question just for a couple of minutes here? Are there specific locations that would need a closer look? And if you can tell us what you're looking for, would these be areas of environmental justice concern? Are these looking for a different type of land cover and land use type or population density? Give us a little more of a prompt, and then let's see if some of those folks we heard from McHenry, we've heard from Naperville and maybe Richton Park about potential interest in in working with those monitors. Mayor Burns volunteered to be a site personally. So let's see what you're looking for. And if we can't, talk a little bit more about this.
Yes, so we are looking specifically at areas that have a particular land use, whether they're really close to a major highway, for example, that could create some concerns, or a particularly dense area with high rises versus residential height of buildings, areas where we have nature-based solutions, so parks and other maybe forest preserves or other important things. Mostly also is driven by your concerns as well, right? Whether you have a concern about a particular area because there's more flooding that happens in that area, for example, right? One of the things we are going to do is actually understand how precipitation is going to fit the area, particularly the extreme events precipitation, where you have this major, which is what is going to be likely to happen in the future, which is maybe the total amount of rainfall is not going to change that much for the region, but how it rains and how it arrives on the land is going to be different. It's going to be probably more specific high intensity precipitation events followed by a relatively dry period later on, which may cause concerns for green spaces, for example, maybe those flash droughts where you have limited precipitation for protracted months and then followed by an extreme rainfall event. Understanding if there are areas that you would think are particularly important to understand better what happens in there because of the precipitation. Water moves, right? And so, in fact, one of the concerns that we had for Chatham is really understanding when it rains. A lot of communities don't flood, others do flood. Rain is the same, but then it moves, or maybe it rains more in other areas and it eventually gets up to Chatham because it's a low point and because the infrastructure is of a particular nature. So understanding more in detail, for example, how rain is going to affect, precipitation is going to affect particular areas in your community is going to be important. And as we refine these things, our models are also going to be helping us determine where we need more observations, where we think they have weak spots in our models that we need to beef up with some direct observation. So yes, a lot of different things: land use, industrial corridors, public transport concerns, things that are of that nature, air quality concern, if there's a particular hotspot that we may want to know, again, not for regulatory purposes, but for understanding what is going on. It'll be all of those, and so we can obviously this is the first meeting we have. We will have more time to sort out things in more detail. I hope
I have a representative from the McHenry County Board, and then I'd like to recognize Mr. Berger. So our friend from McHenry County, all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just part of it was a couple, when I put out the question about what kind of areas would you be interested in, because
Right.
obviously as you get out to McHenry County, it's a lot more rural. I mean, we do have some areas where I think we do have heat. We don't have we have a lot of concrete, huge parking lots. We're not necessarily high rises and that sort of thing, but it gets very, very hot. But we also have great nature-based solutions in our conservation district sites that could be potential areas as well. And also just when you talk about the tree cover and getting more specific about how that works and its impact on the wind and the cooling effect. I mean, the difference between a prairie and the way that heat gets absorbed in a prairie or a piece of remnant property is different than being in a park where there's a lot of grass, even if there are trees. I mean, I can work on a prairie that's a remnant property that's almost 100 degrees and not be nearly as hot to me as it is when you get out into a public park.
Yes.
And what impact native plants have on the whole heat effect. So
Yes.
I just wanted to put that out there, and hopefully that there are opportunities for us out here as well.
Thank you. And actually, one
you.
of the important pieces of our work is going to be actually to characterize the heat dome around the region and say how far does it extend? Right? What are the processes? Also, there's a lot of interest. We had a meeting with the Chicago Park District, and we're going to continue that. They have a tremendous amount of questions about managing their parks, and particularly managing what they are restoring as a natural area, if you will, right? How turf is different from a prairie or a wet prairie or some other feature. And so as we go on in the process, in the project, it'll be really important to identify those areas where we can comfortably and confidently, because they are larger, set up shop in a sense and observe these processes so that we can actually there compare and contrast, right? And say, okay, turf acts this way. We have instrumentations that are necessarily needing larger areas to be representative. And a little bit of what we have been doing at Fermilab. I don't know if you're familiar with the work we have been doing there. There's a flux tower that really records CO2 exchanges from a restored prairie and an agricultural field. And so understanding that and finding other locations where we could collect that information will also be wonderful, because it will allow us to not only understand how nature-based solutions work compared to more managed systems, as well as really providing that information on that urbanization gradient that goes from densely inhabited cities, downtown Chicago, all the way to Fermilab in this particular case. Like I just quote an example, but obviously there's many other suburban locations that or ex-urban locations that could be wonderful for that type of work. So again, we are a strong believer in co-design and really doing things that are mutually important. And so here I am again saying, we want to do a number of things, but we are totally open to design our plan so that it also helps your communities understand better how to allocate funding, how to address some issues, understand their conditions, and how they can become more resilient from your problems, which we're doing our best to align with, but really having some mutual benefit in there that we can work through.
Mr. Berger, all yours, sir.
Thank you. Can you model emission reductions of communities that do some serious implementing of electric vehicles, but they are nearby major highways and thoroughfares where that traffic may just swamp what can be, the benefits of it? Because the idea is to get these communities to implement, at least on a local basis, but not be discouraged if they're by a highway.
Yes, we will be able to eventually model those aspects. I cannot say now we are already ready to do that, but definitely one of the results of our work is going to be actually to pinpoint the relationship between air quality and highway, in particular location, how that plays a role in different parts of the region. So indeed. One of the when it comes to envisioning future scenarios and all that, we'll be able to also put more focus on clean transportation and electric vehicles. And so from the two, there could be an important connection there that highlights the difference and that. I'm not sure if we can go directly into attribution of pollution, but we definitely are. We're going to have tools that allows us to address that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good, very good.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
know that we're keeping a record of the chat, so our
Yeah,
colleague
perfect.
and friend Suzanne
Yeah,
can assist us.
definitely. Talking about climatic benefits of canopy cover and trees. This is work from our colleagues at University of Illinois at Chicago. They've actually they looked into literature and basically, oh, sorry, hypersensitive keyboard here. And basically what comes out is that really the benefits of trees really varies a lot depending on where you are. And for what other factors, right? And so what we are trying to do is really start putting a more specific, and that's another example of how a study that is done in in downtown Chicago, like this image, could actually be different from some done in the suburbs. There have been shown very dramatic differences. For example, between Boston and other areas of the country, I'm just naming a couple. And you see here the spread of the response and canopy cover across the number of studies that have been done. We hope that at some point we will be able to be very specific about what can be attained by planting trees, and in particular configuration along the in this region. For example, just to give you an example, what we have been doing, this is Humboldt Park in Chicago. And so after we did our model representation of a tree and how it performs and how to put it into a model, you can see there what we artificially inserted a number of trees and try to answer the question, if we put trees in Humboldt Park on those three major road streets there, right, in that H formation, what would be the changes in temperature and in relative humidity, basically, because of the trees? And so you start seeing there, and this is an arbitrary way. Maybe communities will have a different way to put trees and won't be on these streets, will be better to have in a park or so. But you can see the impact of trees, how far they may extend and how important they would be, right? And what drives the difference we are still working on, but that's what a model can tell us. The same way it can tell us that at night when trees keep evaporating moisture, there may be a trade-off in there in more humidity in the air at night. And so what we want to do is really get to the root of this and really strengthen this information. And maybe will be other parts of your community area that would be interested in doing this exercise and understanding exactly how many degrees. And if we know how many degrees is going to be cool, then we will know how much air conditioning we may need during the day, at night, to keep people comfortable, and what would be the energy burden with that. And then maybe we need to think, yes, there's going to be trees planted in there, but a microgrid of, a solar microgrid or some other intervention would be helpful to reduce the energy burden even further, or maybe plant more trees or different options in there, right? So that's one work that we have been started doing, and it's already showing some results. Also, we have been looking at comparing cool roofs, green roofs, solar panel roofs, as far as temperatures that they can provide at 2 meters over the city, as well as the AC consumption that will be changing with the adoption of these type of roofing strategies. Again, we are trying to be very quantitative about this and provide some very specific answers about what would be not only the one that provides the coolest options and all that, but also what it would do to the consumption of electricity for AC. Again, there's a difference between nighttime and daytime, and this doesn't include the benefits of green roofs, for example, on controlling stormwater, but that's another thing that we will be adding. But for now, we have been really actually being able to, with our model, to compare these different options and And again, there's a spatial dimension to this. You can see the cool roofs and the effect of lake breezes along the lake. Going more inland would actually provide a tremendous amount of good information on what would be the strategy, which is also based on what people really want at the end of the story. Do they want only to cool? Do they want to have, for example, the Puerto Rican community in Nampol Park is very interested in rooftop gardens for making food. And so maybe the green roofs would address that need. Is there a need to control stormwater peaks, and hence green roofs would help? Not only that, but how many do you need to actually have a measurable impact? How much acreage do you need to have a meaningful impact on both temperature and flooding and managing stormwater? So those are the kind of information that we are generating through the project, and I would be delighted to expand to your area. So again, looking at potential touch points with the climate action plan from my review as an external person. First one, really examining potential solutions, projecting outcomes, implementing clean energy policies, really understanding we can simulate outcomes related to energy burdens, air quality, decarbonization, and all those different things. If they are helpful to you to further refine interventions and guide your investments. Understanding how to reduce vehicle miles traveled, again, simulating impacts, as we were saying before, cost, other outcomes. Being very big in this whole community, the sustaining ecosystem to sequester carbon, we could quantify the potential cooling and water retention services, the soil carbon dynamics, the energy demands, and things like that. Basically, really quantifying likelihood of extreme weather and potential impacts to infrastructure and communities. This would be something we could do and help out, and simulating decisions and their outcomes and climate feedbacks. Because one of the other aspects, I believe, is the next slide, and I'll come back to that, is really we have been working on integrating our decision-making model, which is an agent-based model. It was used for COVID by the city of Chicago, with more refined questions, and combining it and connecting and integrating it with our physical impact, physical outcome model that is going to be able to tell us if somebody took a decision in this, this kind of decision, this is going to be the feedback to climate in the physical system. So we're going to do that. And as you can see, for the 3 communities that we have been working in the city, we have been able to refine this model with data from those communities, and create a tool for making decisions that is going to provide with a broader view of what the impacts could be. So going back to that slide before, these are the things I thought would be helpful and useful. But again, it's your plan. And so I'll be more than happy to entertain other thoughts and other touch points, other things where our work could be helpful to your needs. And so one question that comes is, what are the potential solutions would MMC be interested in? What other tools you think or solution you may have in mind to address the climate crisis, whether it's adaptation. We talked a lot with the city about shelters for heat and cold, where to locate those. We have, there's many other potentials also for mitigations. Again, we touched on a few, but there could be others that would be of interest. Again, community solar, microgrids, other things. So maybe we can see if somebody wants to chime in.
Chime in, folks.
Dr. Negri, I was confused too. Someone was asking about WRF. Would you explain that? That was on a number of slides. What does WRF mean?
WRF is a computer model. It's called Weather Research Forecast. Is a widely used model that simulates what's going on in a particular region. We have used it extensively because, particularly for flooding, it can go down to very high resolutions. So we actually have been using that for a variety of purposes. We have actually helped, just to name one, AT&T to develop an understanding of the potential climate risks to their infrastructure. And so ultimately, we gather with that type of model, we gather information at the 100-meter scale in trying to understand, for example, in their particular case, how higher do their cell towers be in Florida to withstand inland flooding or flooding from a potential hurricane coming through from the coast. So that's just an example. So it's a computer model that really simulates a lot of weather-related and climate-related aspects of forecasting or simulation.
Any other
Thank you.
questions, folks? Please feel free to chime in. I know you're not shy, so.
Yeah.
There was Elena Savona did ask a question about decarbonization and Ellen, I was waiting for that to come up in the alignment with the CAP. Did you want to make a comment or ask a question about that relationship in terms of solutions? And if not, I wonder if I can ask a question just on on behalf of the communities that are on this call. So of the solutions that you are proposing, you're looking at rooftops, green roofs, photovoltaic roofs, permeable pavers. I wonder if maybe just an expansion to the scale of both the buildings and the land use that we have in the suburban region. Take, for example, Schaumburg did raise a hand as potentially being interested in cooperating for monitoring, but Schaumburg has extraordinary retail development, including the very large Woodfield Mall. And I wondered if, just including, we've also got tremendous expansion of a lot of warehousing in the suburban region. And I'm just wondering if you wanted to take a look at what a green roof at that kind of scale for some of our very large developments might mean. I wonder if anyone wants to respond to that idea.
Well, while people gather their thoughts about this, definitely this would be a tremendous opportunity for us to understand. Again, I think that there's our work in particular in the roofing technology has been trying to address a question, which is we know what a single green roof does. There's been a lot of research on a single green roof does, for example. What we don't know is like how the aggregation of many green roofs would do, right? And that's where that would allow us to go from the scale of a single one to a community green roof initiative, or what is the critical mass? What is the critical number of coverage? For example, what is the minimum number of square feet that we need to have to actually have a measurable impact, and how wide that would be, right? And so what you are proposing, Edith, about looking at very large green roofs or very large solar roofs and so on, would definitely be very much in the purview of what we can do, because it would provide us with a way of understanding the dynamics and again that issue of scale that is so important in planning, which you cannot really do if you only have one installation spotty here and there, which is obviously very different. And again, I would just want to say one thing regarding Argonne and CROCUS. We are science-focused organizations. Actually, one of the big issues we had with the other communities was that we really cannot implement any of the things we're doing. We are there to provide data. We are there to provide information for everyone to use to make sure that funding is informed and decisions are informed, and again to arm communities with some relevant information on what is going on. So that is one thing. But if there is an opportunity to partner with other organizations or other funding that are thinking about deploying solutions, we would be more than happy to collaborate, because that will provide us a way to actually measure the impacts and the differences as the systems go up and get implemented. So think about trees. We would actually have a very, very clear understanding of what was before and the actual benefit once the trees have been planted, just to give an example. Same with roofs and of different kinds and things like that. So we can do our best to help out in competing for funds for demonstrations, for example, and all that. We already did something similar with one of our partners who wanted to compete for funds from the Forest Service to plant trees in their neighborhood. And so we basically help them write the grant, and we help them say, if we do this, we will be happy to monitor how trees are growing and what the impact of the trees is going to have on the neighboring community, streets and whatnot. So we cannot implement solutions ourselves. That's not what Argonne does. We actually be in big trouble if we did, because we'd be competing with the private sector. But we can definitely collaborate and make our data available to do these kind of things.
And then if I can facilitate here, there's some interesting suggestions. I'm going to call on Marta Keene, but kind of back to your earlier slide, Christina, about looking for areas of interest. And Marta, do you want to talk about the unique attributes of Will County? And Marta may be muted, but just if she's able to come on, just calling attention to the question in the chat. But Will County is home to the largest inland intermodal facility in North America, with tremendous air quality concerns because of the truck traffic there. I think the regional greenhouse gas inventory that CMAP did show it as the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in Will County. Would there be any interest in looking at the conditions in Will County?
Definitely. I think that obviously we have a budget ceiling on all things, so we will have to carefully weigh all the different interesting possibilities against what we can realistically do. But definitely what I would actually be interested in is start developing these opportunities and having a running list, if you will, of different things. And then what we can do is discuss them with our science team, with the folks who are actually thinking about the science, and try to catch as many as we can into our plans, and maybe dedicate some on-purpose observation campaigns or some other things that we can actually be agile with. So definitely, the point being here that we're at the stage now of collecting ideas. We can refine the process and make it a little more organized, but that's obviously the starting point for us, definitely.
Suzanne just put a nice link in the chat as well.
There have been several questions related to access to data.
Yes.
Jared Patton had one from CMAP too, so I'm hoping you'll touch on that. Dr. Negri,
Yes.
if you could just talk about that.
Yes. So data this is meant to be open science. So data would be accessible to everyone. The only caveat that I would put to this, if it's a community thinks it's too granular, and so some of their particular information, they feel it's going to be not particularly desirable to have online, then we'll discuss that. But generally speaking, the broader studies and all that, all the data will be is intended to be of public use. We're actually thinking now of a place where to put all the data, make it available, make kind of a way for people to understand what the data means, provide them in a more friendly way for people who are not research scientists. Let's put it this way. So yeah, but if you go on our website now, you can actually start seeing some of our instruments. They have online data there about what they're collecting, the information they're collecting, and so we hope to strengthen that as we expand. This year was really the year of putting the system into organization, putting our basically paperwork in, getting permissions, doing all those different things, and setting up. We expect to go much faster in the years to come.
Councilmember Stone, you had your hand up.
I do, thanks. I understand you aren't able to do any implementation through Argonne, and that makes sense. But I do hope that the data that you gather and the studies that you do will be linked to future action that could be taken. So, for example, I put a question in the chat. The roofing industry seems to have succeeded at weakening the building codes that are about to be adopted in Illinois. And if there could be some data provided about the heat loss, for example, from roofs that are less well insulated, so that information could be used for future building code discussions, I think that could be something that could be helpful and could lead to implementation by others that would take action on climate.
Definitely. Absolutely. That's really the intent. When we say societal benefits, is really providing the data sets that can help guide action by others, because we cannot do that. But yes, that's the role of science, I guess. All right, I only have just a handful of slides left. So again, I mentioned here, we went through this already, and basically, just to recap, we have this model that's called CHISIM. It was developed as an agent-based decision model. Over the years, it initially served transportation planning. It was rehabbed and redesigned during the pandemic to understand the epidemiology in the city, basically saying if somebody decides to go to school that day or to take their kids to school their day and go to the office and it's infected, what would happen, and try to understand the situation. Our team worked with the Chicago Department of Public Health and I believe Cook County on that. So we already have what we call a synthetic population, meaning that we have realistically, we can simulate what decisions like 3.3 million people do or something like that, don't quote me on the number, based on their synthetic characteristics, meaning census data, socioeconomic, age, and other parameters. Some communities have been really very helpful in providing more specific data. For example, where are senior housing living, or particular concerns for their community, that if they have data for that. But the idea is to use the synthetic population as realistic as possible to basically say, if person A decides to, I don't know, take the bike every day to go to work, what would that do to air quality, right? Not just one person, but if X% of the population between the age of 20 to 45 decides to take a bike, what would happen? Or if people decide to switch to public transport, if there were public transport that did this service, if people adopted it, what would be the impact to the physical system, to temperature, to anything that is impacted by transportation, for example? Or it could be if people decided to, stop using their washing machines during a big event, what would be the impact to flooding? Or if people decided to plant trees and trees grew at a certain rate a year, what would happen to the flood concerns in Chatham, for example, right? How would that change? Which would answer the question and saying, yes, if you're concerned about flooding and if you decided to plant trees, this would be the maximum that trees could do, right? If trees could address like 20% of your problem or 50% of your problems, or what would be, then what is to be done is different kinds of infrastructure to make sure that water is rerouted somewhere else. Those are the kind of questions, right? So we are looking forward to a community input in formulating these questions in the way that is actually responsive to community needs, and making sure that we answer the right questions. But if I look back to your climate action plan, I could actually see how the work we developed could be helpful, for example, in making sure there's an incorporation of equity and inclusion criteria in there, making sure that decision from everyone is considered. And supporting decisions toward capital expenditure, for example, right? Again, saying, basically imagine to have a computer game at some point, right? Where you can type in your, expected intervention, and actually seeing in relatively real time what would be the potential outcome of that decision. So that's where we are trying to aim. We have some way to go, but now is the time to design all those things. And so what we are seeking is collaborative research, really, like to identify common interests that advance the science and help MMC. Again, community-based science is exactly that, making sure that we do something that is relevant to somebody. Finding important locations for our instruments that help address specific local concerns. This help design scenarios for the future where our work will help understand risks and returns on investment. Concerns that have not arisen yet, that we haven't been able to think through, and any questions that our science could help address, from your perspective, that our science could help address. So those are the kind of things that we are thinking about, and we'll be more than glad to continue the conversation until we refine perhaps something to start from and continue working that. So we hope we can provide some quick wins, if you will, something that would strengthen that collaboration and could be relatively easy to do as we develop the more complicated things with a little more time. So I think that is what I have. Yes, what I also like to say is that when we designed the CROCUS initiative, we always thought of it like a catalyst for an urban science ecosystem. And so there are things we can and cannot do with the funding that we got from the government. For example, we are going to generate a lot of air quality related information, but the Department of Energy doesn't really let us think about health necessarily, right? So we are not going to do studies of incidence of asthma based on our data, but the data will be there. And so we'll be happy to partner with someone who has that interest to develop the data there to provide more insight. And that's just an example. But so the idea is that broadening industry and community participation, we can actually get done a lot more than the initial plan for CROCUS if we go together to seek additional opportunities to expand this work and make it bigger. So with that, we have some time for discussion, and I'm more than happy to do that. I think we have about 5 minutes left.
Our friend Ben from Naperville. Ben, was your question answered that you put in the chat?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Suzanne was able to put the data links up for us to see what they've got online so far. So thank you.
Excellent. That's what I thought. So good. Anyone else chime in? You want to make certain we're respectful of your time.
If I can call on Jared Patton from CMAP, you had a question about the data, but you also have a really interesting suggestion, and I think that might be for the CHI-SIM work. Do you want to?
Yeah, that was a good one.
Good one.
Yeah, I think the data question has largely been answered with that data portal, which I really appreciate. My comment, and this is kind of speaking your first draft, it's something I've been noodling on lately, but I'd be really interested to see models that take into account not just the impact of a decision on individual trips, but on car ownership broadly, because that kind of, once somebody is able to give up their car or give up a car, that has a multiplier effect across all trips that the person takes, and you're kind of locking in those future reductions. Whereas if it's just an individual trip, the person always has the option to take the car instead.
Yes, definitely. And I should add, when we are talking about individuals, the next step is really, there's many people who make different decisions, right? And so decisions that are made at the individual level are one thing. Decisions that are made at the municipal level or the county level or some others could also be included in there, right? And so we could work on that. But definitely I agree with your thought about decision on car ownerships and all that. That will be actually part, as we define the scenarios, the right questions. Those are the type of specific questions that we are really seeking to gather.
Anyone else?
I guess I'd like to, while we have everyone assembled here, I would like, for the benefit of the Argonne team, the participants of the Environment Committee to explain a little bit about the community engagement. We didn't really get a chance to answer that. And then Kevin, would it be okay if I called on you just to talk about how local governments take in information, process requests from communities, deal with enthusiastic constituents, and how sustainability initiatives are elevated and discussed. And then I also might call on Tom Armstrong and Elgin just to talk about the Sustainability Commission, if that's not putting too much on you.
No, I'm happy to do so. Let me answer your question first, and we'll open it up. The reality is this, Dr. Negri, Suzanne, and Georgia, and I'm going to borrow your phrase, Dr. Negri, at a hyper local level, the demand for action is robust, it's sincere, it's passionate. We, of course, as elected officials and policymakers, weigh those requests based on the resources we have. And consistent with the Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region, we try to do our darndest based on resources available, based on staffing, based on opportunities, but we're always weighing this based on everything else that's being asked of us in a small community such as Geneva. We have about 23,000 residents. I would argue that our residents are highly focused on advancing climate action that not only suits our needs, but of course the region's needs. Yet we recognize that alone we can't do much, and based on our limited resources, we can't do as much as we'd like right away. So that seems to be, at least in my experience, the reality of the situation at the hyper local level.
Yes. Thank you.
We're down to just a couple of minutes here. And for the purposes, again, of just showing the breadth of the representation, would everyone who is either on a citizen commission serving your communities, a sustainability environmental concerns commission, put the name of that organization in the chat. And if you're a staff person, if you want to reference what organization you work with in your community, I think that'd be helpful just to help the Argonne folks know about the community engagement when you get to a regional scale, working with local governments.
And Dr. Negri and ladies and gentlemen, if I may, I think the word equity is of such importance. Communities who, in my humble opinion, who fight certain kinds of development because they, quote, don't want it here, yet take advantage of the benefits of those developments because they're already elsewhere.
Yeah.
We sometimes have to pause and realize that, I believe, is that an inequitable policy decision? Do we just say no?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a
That's
tough
a good
one.
question. It's a very tough one. Our role, I think, as scientists is highlight what would happen if you did, if you didn't, and provide the data. But definitely, it's a huge thing. So,
and what
with
I
that,
heard Dr. Negri say is that she's happy to be available in case we need a lifeline during our council meetings. Is that what you're saying there?
That's a good question. I actually cannot do certain things, right?
I know you can't. I'm kidding you. I'm kidding you.
But no, I agree. So I think we have just a 1 minute left. I wanted to say action, plan for actions, because we don't want to let this fade away. I think I want to thank you all for your comments and your questions, and we will make sure we will compile those into a list that will be our starting basis for more thinking. What I'd like to do is keep connecting with through Edith and really set up additional focus meetings to think through more in detail instrumentation, areas of concern, potential questions, and all the things we have discussed in there, so that we keep the conversation going and we actually hopefully offer you some very practical and tangible potential outcomes of the work, and something that's of benefit to all of you and us.
Thank you. And if I may, Edith, just wrap things up. Our EV Readiness First Cohort Award Ceremony is December 7th from 11:30 to 2:30 in Warrenville at the IBEW facility right there off of Warrenville Road. We do not have a climate meeting in December. Our climate pollution reduction grants webinar is to be determined. That's going to be an interesting one because of all the funds available. And of course, the greatest acronym ever, ABEP, Advanced Building Energy Efficiency Policies Task Force, is likely to meet on December 11th. Is that accurate still, Cheryl? Is that we confirmed that?
Yes, it's actually confirmed. And if there's anyone that would like to find out more, then let me know and we can get you more information on that.
Excellent. Excellent. With that, everyone, happy Tuesday again. Thank you all for joining us. A special shout out to our friends, Dr. Negri, Suzanne, and Georgia from Argonne. We look forward to working with you throughout the months and years ahead. And again, we appreciate your time with us. Dr. Negri, good luck on your travels to DC.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all your contribution, your opportunity for us to speak today, and we'll be definitely in touch.
Excellent. Be safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.